Good morning, 7th graders in Clinton. I hope you had a great weekend. I hope you were able to spoil your mom on Mother's Day. And I also hope you had fun at the fundraiser. I know it was different than usual, but I just hope you were still involved in that. Today's lesson is going to be on pages 362 to 363. And we're going to be talking about the collapse of the Soviet Empire, and this lesson is going to be broken up into two parts. All right, so sit back, get ready. If you haven't read the pages, go ahead and pause this and read it now so you can kind of listen up and follow along as I teach this lesson. Okay, and I want to give a shout out to Soraya. I know I probably said you recently, but I want to thank you for the gift card that you sent me. And also Willem, thank you for your gift card that you sent me for Teachers Appreciation. I really appreciate that. And I can't wait till this quarantine thing is over so that I can actually go and spend it and use it. All right, so some review questions. We discussed the countries that gained independence from other colonies. What were some of those ones that we discussed? Well, India was one. We discussed some of the countries in Africa and in Southeast Asia. And we learned about the rebirth of the nation of Israel. Remember, Israel was conquered by Rome in AD 70 and didn't have a home until 1948. So that was a long, long time. We talked about them still having problems with the Arab nation and turmoil that's still going on today, right? What was the Balfour Declaration? Remember? It was the first official recognition by a world power that the Jews needed their own land. And then how long had the Jews not had a nation to call their home? I already said that. It was since AD 70, so centuries, a long, long time. They were just wandering everywhere. They were finding a place to live, whether it be Poland, Czechoslovakia, in Austria, anywhere. And that's why Hitler wanted to invade all these other countries, because he wanted to take control and then gather the Jews. And then Israel declared itself an independent nation on May 13th, 1948, all right? We've also been talking about the Cold War. So now we're going to go back to the Cold War. So we took a little break from the Cold War, and we're going to go back talking about it. Remember, the Cold War was between what two countries? The United States and the Soviet Union. And we have seen that the United States and the Soviet Union had been through many crises that could have led to a full-out war, but it never did. We got involved, whether it would be the Korean War, the Vietnam War, the Cuban Missile Crisis, and we had tension between the two countries, but we never really fought each other. We just supported different teams, okay? And then, so that's the one thing. So now I'm going to go back. We're still going to discuss, and I'm going to, let me just pull out so our outline today, we're going to talk about the collapse of the Soviet Union, like I already said, and the Soviet aggression in the 1970s and in the 1980s, because it's going to be two different extremes, really, and then the strong leadership in the West, okay? Your guiding question is, what strong leaders helped dissolve the Soviet Union? So listen for that, because we're going to talk about that. Then we're going to talk about Ronald Reagan, SDI, Lech Walesa, and then Solidarity. I just totally massacred his name. I was practicing, and I messed it up. And then it's the collapse of the Soviet Union. So let me just show you this map of the Soviet Union before we start discussing. Okay, you see how big it is? It's just taken over control. And that's in the green, okay? And so, oops. Going back. Okay. There it goes. All right, so the Cold War had been going on for a while. We've talked about this. And it began to expand and conquer all the nations. And that's the thing I showed you. They eventually seized more land than they could govern well because they had so much. And so they actually started collapsing because there was so much they didn't have control over it. They got greedy, conquer, 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 but then they didn't have the ability to teach these other nations what to do and how to continue with communism and how to keep on being successful without collapsing. So one of the things when we talked about the different wars, the Korean War, we talked about the Vietnam War, we talked about the Cuban Missile Crisis, and all these instances, the Soviet Union supported communism to spread and grow in these areas. And this happened between the 1950s and the 1960s. When the Soviets invaded Czechoslovakia in 1988, they opposed the Czechs with the same aggression tactics that they used to squelch a Hungarian revolt in 1956. The Hungarians, in 1956, the Hungarians had hoped that America would come to their aid and the West would come to their aid to help them, revolt against the Soviets, but America just stayed out of it, and they allowed the Soviet forces to crush the Hungarian revolt. And so the Soviet Union was going to do the same thing with Czechoslovakia. Now let me show you a picture of Czechoslovakia. Let me pull up my map. Okay. So you see, this is where Czechoslovakia is now. Czechoslovakia is now the Czech Republic, but that's what it was back then, okay? So, the leader of Czechoslovakia, this was a problem because the leader of Czechoslovakia was allowing more freedom to the people. Czechoslovakia having, the Soviets got mad. They didn't want people to have freedom. That's the thing about communism. They don't want people to have freedom. This angered them. So they sent in forces and they were going to crush them just like they did the Hungarian revolt. But they stayed in the area of Czechoslovakia until 1990. So this was in the 50s, and until 1990, they stayed in that area as far as dominating in communism, taking control, okay? Now, that was Czechoslovakia. So you can see how these people are ruthless. Now here, remember talking about the Vietnam War. The North was supported by the Russians, the Soviet Union, and the South was supported by the United States. Well, when the United States finally pulled their people out of Vietnam, then we saw that communism spread throughout Vietnam. Oh, speaking of Vietnam, I've been watching this documentary on Vietnam, and it is so interesting because, like I said before, when I started teaching it, it's one war that I never really discussed a lot. I don't know much about it, and I'm trying to learn. But you remember when I showed you that picture of Ho Chi Minh, and I was just joking, saying he didn't look evil, like Hitler looked evil, and Stalin looked evil, and Mussolini looked evil, but he looked like a kind old grandpa. I was watching this documentary, and they said that was his thing. He wanted people to think of him as a kind uncle type figure, and so he portrayed himself as a kind, hardworking, humble man, and that way the people would trust him, and then he could grab them and rule them the way he wanted to rule them. So I wasn't wrong when I said, I didn't even know that. I was just joking when I said he kind of looks like a kind old man, but that's how he wanted to portray himself. All right, so during the 1970s, the Soviet Union is going to spread communism, or going to try to spread communism throughout Asia and Latin America. All right, so American political leaders really restrained the American forces. They didn't want to get involved. Vietnam really demoralized them. They had a hard time accepting defeat in Vietnam. And we did win a lot of battles in Vietnam, and it wasn't horrible. The Vietnamese lost more people, but it was just the fact that it was the first time Americans or America didn't accomplish what they were set out to do. And it's pretty sad because it was a hush-hush. A lot of people didn't even know that the soldiers were in Vietnam. In America, nobody knew. The presidents hid everything, and it was just a sad time. All right. So the American military leaders denied the military, political leaders denied the military an opportunity to claim a victory during the conflict in Vietnam. If you watch the documentary, you'll see how things were changed, and the leaders were all not on the same page, and I think that's really why we lost. We didn't have the support of the leaders. Following the defeat of Vietnam, they withdrew from international involvement in the mid-1970s. So they were done. All these other countries can fend for themselves. That's how they felt. So the next 17 years, the Soviet Union is going to go out and just wreak havoc on all these countries because no one's going to stop them. The other world power, the United States, is just going to sit back and let it happen. And so the United States became unwilling to help in these affairs. They wanted to keep a peaceful coexistence with the Soviet Union, China, and others. They didn't want to start another war, okay? And then we will see this mentality end, when Ronald Reagan, who in my opinion is one of the greatest presidents that ever lived, but I'm biased, is going to change this. He's gonna kick butt, kind of thing. All right, so Afghanistan, let me show you a picture of Afghanistan, or where Afghanistan is. Talk a little bit about Afghanistan. All right, so what time is? All right, so I'll go back. There we go. So the Soviets engaged in aggression when a large Soviet force invaded Afghanistan in 1979. All right, it's really weird how we fight Afghanistan now, but we're gonna come. Okay, they had they had said that they invaded to provide stability to the Afghan people, to the nation, but the Afghanistan people, or the Afghans, resisted the Soviet troops. They fought hard. So the United States did help Afghanistan, and we provided them financial aid, and we also provided them weapons, which causes a lot of problems because now people thinking Afghanistan has weapons because America gave it to them. That's another story. But still, it's like we're slowly waking up thinking we better do something, or else communism is going to spread even more and take over. The people of Afghanistan lost several hundreds of thousands of people resisting the Soviet Union's invasion, and they facing losses with no prospect of victory. The Soviet Union finally withdrew from Afghanistan in 1989. So even though the people of Afghanistan lost a lot of people, they still put up a fight to stop communism. So we mentioned before that America has stayed out of international affairs, right? Now we're going to see two major countries, Britain and America, getting together to help fight the spread of communism. And one of these people was Margaret Thatcher. Margaret Thatcher. Let me show you her picture. I think there's a picture of her in your book, but I'm going to go ahead and show you her picture. Okay, she was actually a British politician who led a conservative party in Great Britain to victory in 1979. She was a really, really good friend of Ronald Reagan. And I'm going to give you some facts about her. Because this, you think, oh, well, that's what's not important. But this is pretty cool. First of all, she is going to be key in bringing growth back to the British economy. And she will support the American president and is an anti-communist, in an anti-communist strategy. She will support the American president in an anti-communist strategy. She was England's first female prime minister, and her nickname was the Iron Lady. And she got this because she never backed down. She was pretty tough in her beliefs, and she didn't care what people thought. She was going, whatever she believed, she would fight for it, right? So when it came to politics, Thatcher, she was a grocer's daughter. She didn't have a lot of money growing up, and she didn't have a lot of fame. And a lot of times to be a politician or to run for president, you have to be well known. You have to have a lot of money, and she didn't have it. And so she didn't have the money to actually really go into politics. She had no connections whatsoever. Like she wasn't the son of a politician, or sometimes sons become presidents, or she wasn't a governor. I know it's different in England, but that would be the equivalent of someone, like Trump becoming president who had no political experience at all. It would be like the equivalent of something like that. All right, but she was smart, and she got a degree in chemistry, and she also taught herself how to be a lawyer. So she worked really, really hard for what she wanted to do. By the age of 33, she kick-started a lifelong political career by winning her first elected position, 33 years old, okay? It wasn't easy because at this time, she was a woman in a man's world. There wasn't a lot of women in politics at this time, so it was very rare that she won. In 1969, she declared that no woman in my life will be prime minister, this is her words, or foreign secretary. They won't have the top jobs. But she proved herself wrong, and she not only became the first prime minister, woman prime minister, she was a prime minister for 11 years. So that was a long thing. She was respected worldwide, especially by her friend Ronald Reagan. They worked really, really well together. And they rallied to pull their two countries ahead in the Cold War. And they were going to stop communism. In Britain, many of her policies were controversial. But she refused to back down. That's what I was telling you about. And she was that kind of person that was either loved or hated. It's kind of like Trump. People either love him or they hate him. There's not really many people that are in between. It's a love or hate thing. She made a splash when she started selling off government businesses into the private sector. It was a risky move, but it paid off in the end. So she was a good businesswoman also. She helped England get back on track. She was not going to give in to union strikes, and she cut away the power of the union and saved a lot of money. She also lowered taxes, which everybody loves. And one of these days, when you start paying taxes, you're going to love that idea, okay? You may not understand it now. Ask your parents. It's a good thing. But when it was over, you could say that she pulled England out of an economic slump by her sheer grit. So she was a tough person. Now, let's go and talk a little bit about Ronald Reagan. So here's him, Ronald Reagan. Can you see the picture? It should be in your book too. He was the 40th president of the United States. He turned a struggling America into a political, social, and economic force that influenced the world. He was pretty smart. All right, I'm going to pull up my notes on him. So he was the 40th president of the United States. I already said that. In the late 1970s, people viewed him as a has-been actor and too conservative to lead a nation. When he was elected for president, he won in every state except one. That was Minnesota. And the only reason why he lost in Minnesota is Walter Mondale was from Minnesota. Once he was elected president, he proved himself to be a wise and principled leader. He did not want to live peacefully or coexist with communism. He wanted to stop it, okay? So he aligned himself with Britain and other nations to peacefully overthrow communism and restore democracy. He provided military development and started a space-based defense system for the United States. And this was called the SDI, or the Strategic Defense Initiative. Try saying that 5 times fast. This was a space-based system that protected the United States from missile attacks. And they nicknamed, from the opponents, they nicknamed Star Wars. Dun, 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 dun. Okay, sorry. I hear Star Wars, I hear the theme song. He had the military work on developing new aircrafts that had been put on hold. So he's going to restore, he's going to fix America. He's going to get us back up on track. Let us be number one again. He would publicly condemn the Soviet Union, and with America building up its military and having the missile defense program, this really made the Soviet leaders nervous because they had fallen behind in technology and in defense. So they're like, uh-oh. Okay, so the Soviet Union had gone through several struggles, having 3 leaders in 3 years. They just died of sickness and things like that. So Mikhail Gorbachev was the new president at this time in the Soviet Union in 1985. This is when I was in high school, we call him garbage mouth. That's horrible, but you know, teenagers, and this is how we hated Soviet Union. So Mikhail Gorbachev, he agreed to meet with President Reagan to discuss this communist thing, to resolve the Cold War, and nothing happened during the thing. But then they met a year later, and Gorbachev agreed to start allowing the people to make a little bit of change. So they had economic changes, and then he was able to let the people have freedom of speech. All right. Some things he did. Where did it go? So some of the changes in the Soviet Union with freedom of speech, economic reforms, limited government control of trade. So it wasn't completely controlled, and then less control in Eastern Europe. So things are going to completely change a little bit with the Soviet Union. Okay, let me see. So in 1987, President Reagan took a trip to Germany, and you remember the Germany. I'll pull up this map again. Here we go. Remember this right here, Germany? It had Russian control and everything. The Soviet Union built a wall. Here's that wall right there. Remember that wall is the Berlin Wall. It separated East Berlin to West Berlin. And there are many, many courageous stories. I told you about the one, Night Crossing. I hope that you'll take advantage of it and watch it or rent it. And then there's other, they escaped through a tunnel, which was called Tunnel 57. And these are pictures. I'm going to show you pictures of people building a tunnel under the bridge. College students did this, and a lot of people escaped through these tunnels. Where did it go? Where did it go? So some people swim across. This is called, Tunnel 57, and this was the largest massive escape in the Berlin Wall history. President Reagan gave a speech while visiting the Berlin Wall. He was standing by the Brandenburg Gate, which is at the Berlin, and in his speech, he challenged Gorbachev to tear down the wall. And I actually put a little thing in your spot, whatever it's called, to, there we go, right there, to listen to. It's actually his speech. Realize this is just a few minutes long, okay? So, I lost my place. So, in 1961, the Berlin Wall was put up. It was a picture of communism, right? And then I told you there were escape attempts, and some people that got caught were killed, okay? So his famous thing is, Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall. Even though the Soviet Union did not fall until President Reagan was out of office, his consistent leadership was the key part in the collapse of the Soviet Union. With the Soviets losing power, there's going to be unrest in many other different countries, and one of these countries is Poland. So here's a picture of Poland right here, and Lech Walesa. He led an anti-communist movement that combined labor, the Roman Catholic Church, and Polish nationalism to oppose Soviet domination and helped achieve Polish independence. The one thing, though, about him is that he came up with something called the Solidarity Movement, and it's the labor movement led by this man to help achieve Polish independence. He suffered in Poland for doing this by losing his job and being in prison for leading this movement. But Poland would gain their independence from the Soviet Union in 1989. So now so that's all that we've discussed today. We're seeing how the Soviet Union is falling apart, and tomorrow we're going to actually talk about the actual collapse of the Soviet Union. So the big picture for today that you can just take with you is that the Soviet Union showed strong aggression in the 1970s and 80s, and the strong leadership provided by countries in the West played a key role in the collapse of the Soviet Union. Your fact of the day: the scene, if you've ever seen Indiana Jones, you remember there's a scene in it where he's supposed to fight the swordsman and he takes out a gun instead and shoots him? I don't know if you've ever seen that movie. Well, the scene where Indiana Jones shoots the swordsman in Raiders of the Lost Ark was Harrison Ford's idea so that he could take a bathroom break. So that wasn't even actually supposed to happen. I hope you have a great day. I love you guys. I miss you very much. And I hope you're making good choices.